Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
I'm Bill Drees with the Daily Memphian. We are joined by Shelby County Elections Administrator Linda Phillips to talk about the start of early voting and the first election cycle of a busy political year in Memphis and Shelby County. We record this interview Tuesday, February 13th, 2024, and this is on the record. So early voting in advance of the March 5th election day starts Wednesday, April 14th, Valentine's Day, and runs to February 27th. To be clear, February 27th is the last day you can vote early. This podcast is part of a Daily Memphian article about the start of early voting and has all of these dates in there. This is a relatively short ballot, the Tennessee presidential primaries and the primaries for General Sessions Court clerk, the only countywide office that's up for grabs this election year. Linda, what are you expecting once early voting opens tomorrow and people are casting their ballots?
Well, traditionally in Tennessee, early voting in a presidential preference primary is pretty slow. In a normal election, about 60 to 70% of our voters will vote early. But historically, in presidential preference primaries, only about 30% of our voters vote early. So this election is not exactly like recent presidential preference primaries because there's really no choices on the Democratic ticket. So we're not sure what to expect. So we've got a lot of equipment out there. We've got what we think is a normal amount of people, but we also have a lot of people on reserve who we've trained and we can pull in if early voting is higher than we expect.
Right. By my chart, the highest turnout, and this is based on the Election Commission's chart, by the way, turnout chart that is on the Election Commission website. What's the website address, Linda?
ShelbyVote.com.
ShelbyVote.com. All right. These are figures from that. Shows that since 1972, that was the highest turnout of these primaries at 39.2%. 4 years ago, we had 22.3%, 2016, 27.9% there. On the Democratic side, in the presidential primary, on the Republican side, the Republican presidential primary, you also have a number of candidates who aren't in the race anymore. What happens with that phenomenon, or does anybody really able to figure out how that particular phenomenon, having candidates who aren't in the race anymore, how that factors in?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I don't know that I really can answer it. I can say that, our ballot is set in December, and so a number of people dropped out right after the ballot was set and on into January. But they're on the Tennessee ballot, and I think most of the voters in the primary are high information voters, and they're probably aware of the candidates that have dropped out.
Right.
So we'll just have to see what happens on March 5th.
Yeah. And it's hard to tell what these trends are because you're talking about voter to voter. I mean, someone may be having a bad day when they go to vote and just, that could factor into, it could be as simple as that, or it could be somebody who's calculating, well, if I vote this way, it'll have that effect or whatever. So it's really hard to pin down, isn't it?
It is. And, a lot of voters don't make up their mind until Election Day. I mean, traditionally, most of our presidential primary voters vote on Election Day. They don't early vote. So we'll see if that holds true this year.
Right. So this ballot is all primaries, which means voters will declare which party's ballot they want to vote, and that can cause some voters to hesitate. So let's say I'm one of those hesitant voters who is living their life and maybe doesn't have a lot of time to sort things out ahead of going in to vote. but believes that you should vote whenever there's a choice to be made. So what do you say to voters who are hesitant to declare whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, just as a basic function of voting this time around?
Well, technically, you should pick the party who the majority of candidates you expect to support in future elections. But Tennessee has, open primaries. You are what you say you are, and your choice is only you can change your mind in the next primary. We try to make it as comfortable as possible for voters. There's a big D and a big R on the table in front when they check in, and they don't actually have to say the word out loud. They can just point.
Okay.
So, you're not going to announce to everybody in the polling place which party you've selected.
Right. So let's talk about a specific scenario here. The Democratic presidential primary is President Joe Biden. He's unopposed in Tennessee, and you've got this crowded Republican field on the other side. And the primaries for General Sessions Court clerk Lisa Arnold is running unopposed in the Republican primary, and there are 4 contenders in the Democratic primary. So if I only want to vote in the contested primaries, the Republican one for president and the Democratic one for clerk, and I know the answer to this, but I'm sure it's come up. Can I do that since one is a state primary and the other is a county primary? Can I vote in the Republican primary and then vote in the Democratic primary?
No, the answer to that is in this election, you have to pick one or the other. We're totally neutral on which one you pick, but you got to pick one.
Mm-hmm. The Election Commission is putting a lot of emphasis on voters being prepared. What do you mean by being prepared? What are the things the voters should know before they go out to vote early?
Well, one of the big things they need to know is if they're going to wait to vote on election day, what is their polling place? Because we've had 29 polling places change. One is temporary. They had some severe water damage from January storms, and they'll go back to their regular place in August and November. But the others were primarily schools. And when the General Assembly passed the legislation regarding school security, they fundamentally made it impossible to have an election in a building where there were children attending school. So we have relocated all of our schools. Now, every voter that applied to got a pretty postcard in the mail telling them where their new polling place was. But I would really strongly suggest that they go to shelbyvote.com, go to the district locator, and check to make sure. It's right there on our homepage. Click here. It's one of the sliders, so give it a minute if it's not the first one that you see. But click there, and that'll take you to the district locator, and that has all of the information.
All right. And you can also find your congressional district on there, which is key in this vote if you vote in the Republican presidential primary, because you're also voting for a slate of delegates to the national convention statewide, and then you're voting within your congressional district too. That's a difference between the Democrats and Republicans. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Each party gets to run their primary in the way they see fit, and Republicans have chosen to elect delegates by district. Now, as I said, district locator will tell you all of your districts. So while school board and all is not important for this election, it does make a difference in August.
Right. I don't know this because I don't have the early voting locations list, but were there any schools on that list that were affected by this, or are those just election day precincts?
The schools were just election day precincts.
Okay.
If you think about it, we need early voting sites for too long to be able to make schools a practical choice. Now we did, most of the sites are the same. We did move 2 locations from churches back to Memphis Parks community centers. So voters who were voting at Sukasa, they have been moved to Geisman. Geisman is open now. Obviously, in early voting, you can go anywhere you want. And then we've gone back to Ed Rice.
Ed Rice and Frazier is the other. So those 2 are up and running as new early voting sites this time around. You also have seen, and I'll emphasize here, and I'm sure you'll emphasize too, this is not the election commission saying this, but at a lot of sites, they have taken the position that they don't want any campaigning on the property all the way up to the property line. I mean, normally there's a state law that says there's a 100-foot marker beyond which you cannot campaign 100 feet from the polling place. But some of the places have told you that we'll agree to do it, but no campaigning on our property, right?
Right, that's correct. We have a few sites, not many, but a few have made those choices. And we actually have found that voters really like some of those sites. They're not wild about being accosted by campaign representatives.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got a few voters that have called and told me that they just love it so much that they'll drive out of their way to go to Tennessee Shakespeare. Because not only is it a lovely facility, there is no campaigning there.
Oh, right. Right. Well, I've also heard from voters who have checked out the layout of the different early voting sites and base whether they have to run through a line of campaign workers as to whether or not they'll go early vote there or go vote somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, I think we've got kind of the best of both worlds here. If you like interacting with campaign workers, you've got some sites you can go to. If you've already made up your mind and their, campaign workers are just annoying to you, you've got some sites you can go to.
Mm-hmm. From the outset of early voting here in the early 90s, it was never seen or described as something that was going to increase voter turnout. Its goal was to make voting more convenient. But is there a way that early voting in some form could raise overall turnout instead of kind of just moving it around? Or are we asking too much of the process?
Well, I have seen the fundamental reason people go vote is that they think their vote makes a difference. And whether you have a lot of early voting, I don't really think that makes a lot of impact. It doesn't change the calculus of, okay, I've got 500 things I need to do this week. Is my vote going to make any difference? So I should do 501. So that's kind of what I see. I think it's a convenience factor. I mean, it is difficult for some people to vote on election day. They have jobs, their shifts may change, they may not know. So if they're free on a Saturday and, oh, wait, there's an early voting site, I can take care of that now. So I think that makes a huge difference for some people.
Mm-hmm. Some people say have fewer elections, that we vote too many times and that leads to ballot fatigue. But if you have fewer elections, I guess you still have the same number of offices and the ballots just get longer.
Yeah, I was going to say there are some legislation currently in pending. I don't know where it'll go. It's early in the session, but that would eliminate standalone municipal elections. They'd have to be either moved to August or November. So again, it just, I'm hoping that if they do move that, most communities will choose November because the August ballot every 8 years is already so incredibly long.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's another constitutional amendment that might fix some of that, but again, that's at least 8 years away. So,
right. Again, in terms of voters coming out for this, are early voters different than election day folks? Or do we have traditionalists who you hear from who wouldn't dream of voting early? What how
we do. It varies a lot. This has been like back to 2016, I think. I did a survey of election day voters and asked, why did they pick election day? And about half of them said it was a tradition and election day was a very sacred day to them. The other large percentage, 40%, said, I just pushed it off until the deadline. And then we had a few others that just said, it wasn't convenient. My work schedule, I was out of town. I knew I could vote on election day. So, but yeah, there are people and some communities, it's a very strong tradition that you vote on election day.
Right. So there's no shortage of sites. How many have we got this time? Is it
We've got 26 sites.
26.
Yeah, of early voting locations. The one downtown opens at 9 and closes at 5 on weekdays. Then the rest of them open 11 and close on 7 on weekdays. All of the sites are open consistent hours on the Saturdays. One Saturday they open at 8, close at 4, and one Saturday they open at 10 and close at 4. Now, I would remind voters that early voting ends 2 days earlier for a presidential preference primary than it typically would in any other election. For reasons known only to the Tennessee legislature, early voting in my presidential preference primary ends on the 7th day prior to the election. In every other election, it ends on the 5th day prior to the election. So don't wait till day 5. If you wait till day 5 before the election, you're going to have to vote on election day.
Okay. So is it still 14 days then that we have?
Well, it starts the 20th day and it ends the 7th day, but you've got a weekend in there, so some Sundays. So I really think you're only looking at 12 or 13 days, but I don't have a calendar in front of me.
Right. I've got one here, but we'll let that stand. We'll add it up later. Voter turnout here for most cycles is to be charitable, not healthy, with the exception of the presidential general election. That's the one where we consistently get a majority of our voters. And in looking again at the turnout table on the Election Commission website, we haven't had a majority of the city's voters show up for a mayor's race since 1991. And the last majority turnout in a countywide election that was not a presidential general election was November 2018 for the midterms. And before that, it was the November 1994 midterm elections. What can we do to change that trajectory? Is that up to candidates, or is there some larger civic voice? Do you think that can change that?
Well, we're working very hard to make sure that voters know that their vote matters. I mean, I know sounds kind of like a platitude, but everybody's equal in the voting booth. It doesn't matter where you went to school or how much money you made. Your vote counts just as much as everybody else's. And if you have an opinion and you're not happy with something, vote. And yes, I understand that a large number of voters vote in presidential elections only. But honestly, the people that make the most difference in your lives are your school boards, your city councils, your county commission. Those folks have an impact on your life by setting your tax rates. Who's president? Yes, that makes a difference, but it doesn't impact your life immediately quite as much.
Mm-hmm. So you're now several elections into the new voting system, a choice between hand-marked paper ballots and voting machines that are touchscreens with a paper trail that is fed through a digital printer, a digital scanner, and kept in a locked ballot box. Do you have many voters who are not running the piece of paper through there, which is the last step, or are voters generally attentive to that?
Well, I've got staff there watching them. I think every once in a while somebody will I've seen this throughout my entire career. Somebody will sign in, they'll go to a voting booth and they'll decide not to vote. I don't know why. I have no explanation for that. But I see it happen with every election. But we do, I think, a good job of making sure the voter who has completed the ballot scans it.
Mm-hmm. Anything new coming up in terms of voter technology that's out there on the horizon?
No, I don't. Not anything that's going to be approved by the state of Tennessee anytime in my lifetime. There is some interesting studies being done and some interesting pilot programs with military voters who are overseas, who generally have, while they have good email and they have secure communications, Tennessee law requires that their ballots be returned by mail, and that's a little tricky for where some of our servicemen are deployed. So there is a bill that would launch a pilot program to test ways that those voters might be able to get us a ballot in a more secure way. But otherwise, no, I don't think blockchain voting is going to happen anytime soon. I don't think we're going to go to internet voting. Because you just at this moment with the technology we have, you can't be sure that the person on the other end of the computer is who they say they are.
Mhm.
When you come in and you show a photo ID, we know you are who you say you are.
Right, right. Okay, that's where we will leave it. One more time, Linda, on the early voting dates and where voters can get more information about this.
Well, early voting starts on February the 14th. It ends on February 27th. The election is March 5th. And everything you need to know about to be voter ready is at shelbyvote.com.
All right. And we also have links to that as well in this article that this podcast is also a part of. We have been talking with Shelby County Elections Administrator Linda Phillips. I'm Bill Drees for the Daily Memphian, and this has been On the Record.